So, we'll tell a couple words about the hormones that are released from the posterior pituitary. So, as you already mentioned, generally those hormones are created in hypothalamus and only released from the posterior hypothalamus. Posterior pituitary. So, most of the hormones that are produced released, let's say, most of the hormones that are released from the pituitary gland are produced in the pituitary gland. But there are those two, namely oxytocin and vasopressin, that are not. So, first of all, we are talking about antidiuretic hormone. So, the other name for the antidiuretic hormone is the vasopressin. How does it work? And why we need it? Generally, as you see, here, this is mainly for the water regulation. So the vasopressin oxytocin is generally for controlling how much water would get back from the urine into the body, into the organism, mainly by the kidney regulation. But so without antidiuretic hormone, there is increased amount of the water that flows to the urine. Yes, so one more time. Antidiuretic hormone. So diuresis is production of the urine. Antidiuretic hormone is just to stop diuresis, to reduce diuresis, to reduce amount of water that we lose with our urine. The real life example of it, that when we drink alcohol, beverages, it leads to the situation that the antidiuretic hormone is blocked. The action of the antidiuretic hormone is blocked. And it leads to increased production of urine, as most of you already know. This is the mechanism behind this. Okay. The other name of this hormone, of the antidiuretic hormone, is the vasopressin. Why it's called vasopressin? It's called vasopressin because it also is able to increase tension of the smooth muscles in the blood vessels. So, in simpler words, to cause vasoconstriction, to cause vessels to shrink. So when we add those two things, so increased muscle tension in the vessels of the wall, so vasoconstriction, and increased amount of the water in the organism, it leads generally to increased blood pressure. So this is the hormone that leads to increased blood pressure. What activates it? Generally, as you can see here, this hormone is regulated by the receptors in the brain. But what is the stimuli that would activate those receptors that will lead to increased production? Generally, increased fluid osmolarity, decreased blood pressure, decreased blood volume, pain, stress, nausea, vomiting, things like that. So, increased body fluid osmolarity. Why the osmolarity matters? One more time, let's get back to these concentrations. So let's imagine that we have a pot with water and salt in it. If we will boil it up, the concentration of the salt inside would increase. So it would become more salty. The same is similar at least, is with our organisms. When we perspirate, when we urinate and so on, we lose mainly water. Most of the ions remains. So when the osmolarity is increased, it means that we lost water. So antidiuretic hormone preserves water. So every information that the brain has that leads to the conclusion that we lost water, so lowered blood pressure, increased osmolarity, increased blood volume, and so on. So all the information, from all of these informations, we can deduce that the water volume in the organism dropped. So if the water volume dropped, we need to do something to increase it. So what we do? We produce, for example, the vasopressin, antidiuretic hormone. Okay, this is the general idea. With oxytocin, oxytocin is, of course, we are talking mainly about women when we think about oxytocin, because the main thing that is connected to this are the uterine contractions, and this is, I suppose, the most important thing to remember about it. However, as all of the hormones, the men also have them. There was some research that oxytocin is important to develop relations between men and women, generally speaking. Oxytocin will also help with milk production, although the prolactin is rather more important with it. About prolactin, you will answer me at next time. Okay, so we'll generally need to speed up a bit with the endocrine system. So next week we'll finish it and we'll go on with next topics. Okay.